Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to GPCA and EIA Incorporating Emotion in Technology Development Workshop. I am Jenny Du. I'm an Acting Manager of Partnership and Engagement at GPCA and EIA. First of all, I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining our workshop today. And today's workshop, including the students from all the background we have attended, including cohort of students from our Hoa Shan College, EIA, GPCA, all of our onshore and offshore partner, and also including Asian and other students from our onshore university. And in this time, we are honored to have invited Professor Leon Sterling to speak about how can emotion be incorporated into the design and development process of product and service, and how it could be improved the overall user experience. And I would like to introduce our guest speaker today, Professor Leon Sterling. He is a professor of software engineering, University of Melbourne, and he also is a chair of academic board from Edvantage Institute Australia, EIA. Professor Leon Sterling has a distinguished academic career. After completing a PhD at the Australian National University, he worked for 15 years at university in the UK, Israel, and the United States. And he returned to Australia as Professor of Computer Science at the University of Melbourne in 1995. And in 2010, he moved to Swinburne University, where he served as Dean of the Faculty of Information and Communication Technology for 4 years and Pro Vice Chancellor for 2 years. So he has very extensive academic governance experience. And recently, Leon has been ranked in Guide to Research 2021, ranking of the top 1,000 scientists in the field of computer science and electronic, and is ranked 165th in Australia. So let's join me to welcome Professor Leon Sterling. And thank you, Professor Leon, for joining the workshop today. And now I will hand over to you to start the section.
Thank you, Jenny, for that introduction. And let me start with sharing my screen.
Sure.
And again, I will go and put it into mode. There's always slideshow mode. So that's working. So you're seeing the slide and not my background. That's all
yes,
good?
yes.
Okay. So, so it really is my pleasure to be here today. And in a way, it's so exciting. Think how amazing it is. We've got people all over the world listening to the technology in person. Again, it's certainly a new experience for me. Again, I think it's the largest number of Zoom attendees where I'm not sure I can pronounce all of the names on the Zoom screen, but really wonderful to share knowledge. And it's possible because of IT. And I still remember 50 years ago, the first time we had a live television broadcast from one side of the world to the other. It was really amazing. And I got up early in the morning to be able to watch it for the first time in Melbourne. It's amazing. And now it's absolutely routine that we do this technology. Technology really has been wonderful. So I'm sure all of you have mobile phones. Again, looking at there. So that's one I like. I'm a fan.
I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Sorry, this is fine. So I have my mobile phone. Who would have thought I could carry around an encyclopedia, a camera, a communications device? I wouldn't have dreamed that was possible a period of time ago. So information technology has been an amazing experience. And I guess I want to share a little bit about that in my talk. So what am I going to be talking about? So I'm just going to spend a little slide setting the context about IT. expanding the theme that I looked at. And again, it's also an opportunity for you to get used to my Australian accent. Please, if you don't understand, I'm more than happy to go slower to make sure that you understand what I'm looking at. And I also am very happy to take questions as we go along. A problem with Zoom is if it's not interactive, so I'll try and make it a little bit interactive when I can, or at least stop for you to stretch at various stages in the talk. But so that's what I'm looking at. So after my little bit of introduction, then I'll start with a personal story which got me into this whole direction of incorporating emotions in technology development, say a bit about information technology, and give some of the applications that I have used emotions to help design better technology. The examples come from health and well-being, but they could equally apply for e-commerce, education. I've got a lot of applications, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about that directly. And the last thing is my own current research. I'm always excited to talk about my research called motivational modeling that we teach regularly at the University of Melbourne and Swinburne, and I'm trying to share for other people. So I'll say just a little bit about that before the conclusions. Okay, so I've got a comment in chat. So let me see that. Okay, good. Yeah, so let me, in my IT view, just say a little bit, a very, very quick pass through the evolution of computing and why it's important to get to emotions now. So the first computer was developed in the 1940s. If you ever get a chance to come to Melbourne, the actual oldest computer that's kind of in some degree of existence is in the Melbourne Museum. That was built in 1949. And those early computers we used for doing, they were big, big computers, and they did calculations for business and for defense purposes. And slowly you went away from very big computers to much more personal ones. So in the 1970s, there were computers on desktops. So when I started my university career and as a researcher, I started using desktop computers. In the 1980s, there were personal computers, so more people started using computers. The picture here is of an early IBM PC. The Macintosh, which really changed the whole interface for computers, happened in 1984. 10 years on, and people realize it's not just a computer on your desk, it's being networked and having access to the internet and a whole range of knowledge. That happened in the 1990s. And all of a sudden, computers weren't just something that people used in universities. Every home started needing to have a computer connected to the internet. And I remember that happening in the late 1990s when I moved back to Australia. All of a sudden, computers changed from being something that only a small number of people had to almost every family had. In the 2000s, we had the launch of the iPhone. There's a picture of, I think, an iPhone 2. And that changed a whole range and created apps. And all of a sudden, many more people are using apps. And then in the 2000s, you've got tablets and social media. I like to say, and I said when I was dean, information technology underpins everything. So for those of you considering having a career in information technology, it's a great choice. I've had a great set of experiences and got to think about interesting things. And you've got a chance to apply information technology to almost every field. And not only does it almost all applications use information technology, it really affects everyone. And really, one of the reasons I did this evolution is it moved from being useful for governments and business to more researchers, to individuals, to groups. And again, so it's very much a personal consumer response that people need to look at. And when you have to cater to a whole range of different people, it changes how you build the application. So it's interesting. I'm not sure what the screen, I'm getting blue lines on my screen. Is that something that's happening for everyone, or so yeah, not sure what that is. I might go backwards and forwards. No, the blue lines are still there. But again, if you think about it, I had a research project a bit over 10 years ago. How do you design technology for grandparents and grandchildren to have fun together? It was a really interesting project, and we built some prototypes, and we were ahead of our time, because in times of COVID, when people were locked down, you really wanted a chance to interact with people over the computer and have fun and have positive interactions. And that's a different job than building applications for everyone to, you know, it's different than having a business application where you can tell people what they can use. If you all of a sudden need to make sure that people have fun, then, and it's grandparents and grandchildren, if it's not fun, they won't use it. So there's a whole different mindset that you need when you're developing applications in that space. Okay, so let me now move on. So that's my background, and let me start with my personal story, and I'll stop. So if anyone, is everyone happy with the pace and the speed which I'm going at? Maybe a few people. If you can understand me, can you raise your hand on the screen? Okay, thanks, Mia. That's other people, the listeners. Am I speaking too quickly, or everyone's happy with the understanding? Okay, so thank you for those that comment. Okay, so the personal story. My mother passed away a little over 10 years ago. And it was actually just when I started off becoming dean at Swinburne. And before she passed away, she had a fall in her house. And it really was actually caused her more damage than I appreciated at the time. She was living alone, and I, as her son, was worried how she would manage in her home by herself. And we arranged, she agreed rather reluctantly to have one of these emergency alarm services. So this is a picture of one. It's called the MEPAC service. And the idea is you wear this pendant around your neck, and if you get in trouble, you press the red button. As well, there's this base station over here that you're supposed to check the green light once a day between 6 and 11 in the morning to check in how you're going. And again, if you don't check in every day, the service will call you to make sure that you're okay. And that's a check to make sure that people are safe in their house. As I said, I arranged this service for my mother, and she was reluctant to accept the service. She was a very independent woman. She wanted to stay in her house, and that was really almost, if you don't agree to have the service, we won't let you stay in the house by yourself. So reluctantly, she agreed. It was terrible. My mother hated it. Why did she hate it? Well, one thing, the pendant, and if you have a look at the pendant, you know, it's a bit ugly. So she didn't like the look at it. And she called it, "You're making me wear a cowbell." It's like you put a bell around the neck of a cow so you can hear it coming when you're out in the field. And it made my mother feel less than human when she had to wear this service. So that was a big problem. And she always kept referring to a cowbell. It wasn't very positive. She got stressed by having to press the button at a particular time. And she got so nervous, she pressed it at the wrong time. And I think there were 4 times I got called by the service. We're not sure about your mother. She's pressing the service at the wrong time. And I didn't live too far away. So I would go over to her house and she was fine. But she was just very, very worried and anxious. Would she press the button? And she didn't want to disturb me. And after less than a month, we said, this isn't working. I'll come and see you every day anyway. And we switched off the service. So all in all, that emergency service didn't work for my mother. And the thing was, she died. I was coping with her ill health. And then afterwards, I thought about, why did it work so badly? And the conclusion that I came to was, that it wasn't designed well. And I remember meeting, by coincidence, the software service people, and I said, oh, this emergency service alarm is terrible. And they said, oh, why? It works very well. Everyone's very happy. It works perfectly. And no, it didn't for my mother. It did work technically, but it made my mother feel anxious, not confident, reminded her that she was getting less independent. So the criteria for this product had to be not just the technical. So that's the lesson that we learned from it. So we said, how can you change the experience of someone with the view? And we got funding from the Australian Research Council, and we developed an app for an iPad where instead of having to respond to this box, you got a picture of your grandchildren or whatever else. And then you had to click your new picture. And if you clicked on the picture, then you knew that the person was okay. And you had a chance to comment. There was a little bit more for it. And again, it was a much more positive experience. So what did we learn? Making something positive worked much better for people. So people liked the interaction with this touch frame application. Looking at a photo is much more meaningful than buttons. And then you can have a better conversation. If someone has forgotten to accept the photo, rather than saying, why didn't you press the button? You can say, did you like the photo that I sent? How did you do it? Or you can talk about the grandchildren or whatever photo that you'd sent. And that worked well. And people were motivated to look at the picture. They had a positive experience, and it built confidence for people to use the technology. And interestingly, some of the families thought their parents wouldn't be able to use the technology, but they did, because if they wanted to look at the photo, they were able to do it. But having a family to supportive was actually crucial. And so we're really pleased by this application, and we talked to a number of old age homes and various other places, would they adopt it? And it was tricky. So I don't have time to go into it, but why it wasn't successful are things not necessarily to do with the technology, which is interesting. So that's what you need to do. So we had a positive experience. If you design something better, thinking about what will be a positive experience, you're able to build better technology for people. So the next thing I want to talk about is how this fits in with the developing software. So as all of this IT has evolved, you've got a project to design or build technology or a service. The standard way for many years was what's called the waterfall model. And you go through a stage where, first of all, you describe the requirements, then you go through a design phase, you build code and execute it, then you test it, and then you release it. And again, the requirements, they started out just being the functionality. They learned that you needed to not only include functional requirements, you needed also to have quality requirements, or that's sometimes called non-functional requirements. Technology needed to be secure, scalable, easy to use. So there are a whole lot of other factors that weren't just the functionality of the software. But somehow this didn't lead to successful projects. And there was a movement against this model. Often what happened is when you tested it, you found there were problems and you'd have to go back and change the requirements in the design. And that was very expensive. And they've gone through a new process called Agile, where you build it much more incrementally. In the teaching that I do, almost all of our software projects use Agile methods, and increasingly that's the case in terms of software. I don't have time to go through all about Agile, though I'm happy to introduce the word. Here's a picture of trying to explain it. And the one point that I want to make in this picture is there are a lot more people involved. You've got a product owner, you kind of listen to what people's needs are. A whole set of people review the software in a way that's not just technical. And it's in that space where you're able to take into consideration a broader set of criteria than they did previously. So if I move on to my next slide, what we've done, the whole process, software development has learnt from various other activities. This first half of the diagram, these 5 hexagons, are the stages of design thinking. And so some of them are similar. You build a prototype and you test it. Ideate is kind of like a design. Define is kind of like doing requirements, though it's kind of slightly more abstract. The stage which I want to comment a little bit more is this first stage, empathize, which is important in design thinking. But typically, and when I learned software, we didn't talk about it. And it was that stage which was missing for my mother. The idea is empathize is understand what the problem is for the person that needs to use your technology or service. And for my mother needed to have an emergency, but actually more important than what to do in emergency was my mother needed to feel, she needed to feel independent. She needed to feel that people were helping her. And if she's wearing this device that she doesn't like, that isn't going to, no matter what you do for the other part of the service, if you're not comfortable using it, it's not going to work. And indeed, my mother's experience is not unusual. For a lot of those early emergency alarms, people just don't use them because they're not helpful. And the other part of the goal, and this goes into the diagrams in my research, that when you build the requirements and when you actually talk about projects, you have the functional goals of what should your system or service do, what are its capabilities. You have the qualities, what should it be? Should it be easy to use? Does it need to be secure? Who are the stakeholders, roles? Who are the people involved that the service or the project needs to interact with? And this is a new one indicated by a heart, is how do you want people to feel when they interact with the service? And that is a very, very powerful question to ask that often people don't ask. And we're used to rating things. So if you go through an airport, you might get 5 smiley faces, rate this service. But rating a service, whether it's good or very good, isn't the same thing as saying, how do you feel when you interact with the service? Or if you go to a website, how are you feeling when you interact with this website? If you're feeling confused or the website isn't helpful, then you're missing out on something very important. And I'll give a more concrete example of that very shortly. So being able to add these as requirements to take into account, especially because the technology is necessary for everyone now. It's not just for business users or a narrow user. Everyone uses a mobile phone. I bet most of you have a mobile phone or rely on it. You use apps, all the things that you use. If it's not fun to use, you won't use it. And making sure that people feel good when they interact with it is just as important, and arguably even more important if people are going to use the service. If you need to feel positive when you're using it. So what I'm going to do now is talk 3 examples of in my research and practice where taking an emotional view helped for the particular application. And as I said, they're from the health and well-being space. And again, as I said, we've got examples for later on. So the first example is help people sleep better. It was a project called Sleepy, and it was part of a project at Swinburne University of Technology, where they were encouraging more people to get help for mental health support online. And one of the things that people worry about is if they're having a bad night's sleep, that they want something to help them go back to sleep so they feel comfortable. And having a bad night's sleep is a real problem for a lot of people. So a lot of places will give advice. So here's a typical one from a good organization, reachout.com, how to get a good night's sleep. So that's all fine, sensible advice, what you need to look at. But let me raise that question. If you're not sleeping, when are you going to worry about not being able to sleep? It's at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need it. Is this going to be comfortable for you when you read? When you wake up in the morning, do you want a page of text to read? Look at it. It's all sensible advice, but is that going to be comforting for you to be able to help you get sleep? And the answer is probably not. How can you design it better? And again, if you're trying to be comfortable, if someone's distressed, if they can't sleep in the middle of the night, what does that mean differently? And we had a project, and we only did a little bit of testing, but we had some kind of combination of design and IT students develop an app for providing it. It was called a Sleep Well app. So this is the homepage of an app. It's carefully designed in black, so if you wake up in the middle of the night, it's not bright colors, so it's just calming. And you look at that, doesn't that look better than the web page of what you're trying to see? And what can you do? So in the middle of the night, you've got 4 big buttons. You can try breathing. You can try and suggest mental images. You can put on some background sounds or music and relaxation. And then there are some tips which you can read to help. But you've designed it and you've thought about what will make it less distressing for someone when they want to sleep better. And in the application, where does it say, please use a dull background? Or where does that come from? In order to give the advice, they had advice for people to know how to help them sleep, but it was catering or building onto their emotional state and doing something that was helpful to calm them down, that was important to build in to the application. So there was one example where thinking about the emotions led to a much better looking and comforting application than you would look at otherwise. So that's my first example. And again, that was actually really done. It didn't get so, that was just done as a small project. But I think it shows the difference between just providing information and thinking about what will be comforting. Here is the second project, and this was a much more larger scale project. I was part of a team of psychologists that got about $2 million from the Victorian state government for health and human services to develop a tool and a computing resource to help people who have severe persisting mental illness. And they focus particularly on people with psychosis. How can we help them recover? And can you provide an online environment to make it better for people to interact? And the idea was to have a tool. You can perhaps read it. It needed to be used across all sectors of mental health, for community services, people who are not in the community service space. By, again, it needed to be empowering. And it was also important to relate to people's lived experience. And again, it was a second project. As I mentioned, Swinburne had started to look at the electronic health resources, and they had a portal for people to get mental health aid. And the portal wasn't very friendly. And interestingly, in this project, and what I encouraged them to do is try and get some emotional requirements, ask how people want to feel when they develop the application. So I'll talk a little bit more about what people came up with. But again, we got feedback. So the people developing the software were originally reluctant to ask that question. They said, tell us what the service should do. Give us those categories. And they got a certain set of requirements. But somewhat reluctantly, they said, okay, in our focus groups with likely users, let's ask them, how do you want to feel when you interact with this service or this software environment? And the team of software developers were delighted, as were the psychologists. They got much, much more information by saying there was an outpouring of, I'd like to feel this, or I'd like to feel that. And it really helped for people design the software, and they ended up with a much better project. There was an activity, so the colors were calming and supportive. There were, again, you probably can't read, but there were 7 sections: recovery, managing stress, your personal health, I think that's your meals, your relationships, your empowerment and life, and various sections which you could turn into. It was important to have shared experience. There were a lot of videos that were developed, and there were charts that you could track your progress. And each of those, so here is those particular activities, the messages were appropriate. Fiona, by the way, was the project manager, so she got a name looking at it. So when you logged in, it remembered what you had done. So there was a whole lot of activities that were trying to build in to meet the emotional requirements that people had for the project. And it led to a particular set of outcomes. Was it widely used? Did it suddenly transform mental health? Well, that's the challenge. And as I said, the barriers for why people use it or not use it are not just the technology, it's how much support that you have otherwise. But people, when they interacted with the software, had a positive experience. And so again, that was interesting. And again, so it met the requirements, and the design really helped. And this software was much better than the previous attempt that was Swinburne providing mental health services online. This was a much better example. The final example that I want to mention for now is this was another large project. This was led from the Department of General Practice at the University of Melbourne. And again, I was a consultant on the software side. And the idea was to develop a mobile clinical prediction tool to estimate future depression severity and help people be able to interact online. And there was a screening app which classified people, were they under severe mental health, depression, moderate, or they were light, where some training materials could help. And interestingly, what we did was, for a start, develop 2 designs for people to be able to compare. How do you feel when you interact with the individual designs? And with the focus groups, they commented about how they felt, and it was useful. And we were really pleased with the feedback that we got from those focus groups. And there were messages. So one of the things that we did and developed in the project, you had to be very careful with your wording, that you want a positive image. She was saying to someone, your mental health is very bad. You're in severe risk of getting depression and it's going to be hard for you to improve your life. Wasn't sending a very positive message. So again, reminding that, okay, I think you could benefit a lot from a lot of help. This is what we're encouraging you to do. Building on a positive message was important. It was important when they filled information that they felt that the information provided to them, and that they wanted some information, that the app was authoritative, that it really was useful, that what they told them was useful advice for people to help their mental health. What they found is, if you sent the message and when people looked at the app, the users responded that they felt more inclined to take action to improve their mental health, which was a great thing and a great outcome of what they were trying to look at. In order for people to feel more positive, to do something about improving their mental health, you had to think about the emotional message that was being developed by your interaction with the software. And that's where I'm talking about emotional requirements. Looking at a screen is not emotionally neutral. And that's really my lesson. Again, in the past, people said, oh, that's someone else's job, not the developer's job. But thinking about what emotional message is really important all of the time when you do your development. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more. So emotion, so I'm saying how you embed it in processes. There are companies that do emotions better than others, and look at those which are appropriate. Apple is certainly a company that's been a leader in design, and the original people said form follows emotion. That's been part of it. They want to have a very positive experience when you interact with the Apple product. They do that all the way from the packaging to design of the stores. It's not an accident. Apple wants to have you to have a positive experience, and that's shown. And I'm not going to talk more about it, but they are definitely a company which considers emotions in your interactions with the company. So that's one example. Another example that I like is Airbnb. So I find when I go visiting places, I will usually look at Airbnb before I look at hotels. And a key part of that is I find my interaction with the Airbnb software very positive. It's bright, it's easy to use. I feel I'm part of a community. It sends me positive reminders. Oh, you're going to this place. Isn't that exciting? Only 1 week to go till you go on this holiday. When you're finished, write a review, see how many other people are joining. So I felt included, positive, part of a positive experience. That's part of it. And again, Uber compared to taxis, and it forced taxis to change. When you order a taxi or when you're waiting for a car, you want to know how it's going. That was something Uber did very well. Your car is only 2 minutes away. This is what you're going to look at. So it's been designed to be reassuring in your particular set of examples. So some companies do build in emotions, and it's something to think about, to look at. And the last example I do before I say just a little bit more about my research is talking about the Now robot. How many people have seen a Now robot? I'll let you stop. So please raise your hand on the chat if you've seen a Now robot. So a few there. So I'll do that. So I love Now robots. Again, they were kind of fun. one of the things that I did when I was dean at Swinburne was buy several of them for our research. And Aldebaran, who was the original founder of the Now robot, and they got taken over by SoftBank, really was looking at emotions. They cared very much about how you interacted with the robot. And people, it's kind of friendly, it's childlike, so people don't feel threatened by the robot. That's no accident. It's kind of an example, it's kind of cute, it kind of does things. It was designed very carefully. So here's a quote: Aldebaran created to be a daily companion. He is the little creature to help you be your best. His humanoid form and extreme interactivity make him really endearing and lovable, both emotional goals, and they were really successful. And we've found that, so we've had a range of projects. So this is my close colleague, Sonia Padel, taking a Now robot to a dementia group in a community council in Australia. And there, see, people are happy. They're not threatening. They're kind of looking, they have positive interactions. Part of the interaction, they got them to lead exercises. They designed it a chair so you could do exercises from a chair. You just look at it, it looks cute, and people look at. We had another project with the Royal Children's Hospital and the physiotherapy department to lead children through exercises who were covering, who needed to practice exercises. So there's a robot doing an exercise, and the idea is you have a child do the exercise along with the robot. And it actually produced much better engagement with the exercise than it did previously. So we had a PhD student do a rigorous test of how supportive that was. As part of the process, we always ended off with a bit of entertainment. So let me share that. So apologies for my poor filming of the robot doing Gangnam Style. But again, I can't tell you the number of times I demonstrated the robot doing it, and every single time you'd get a smile on people's faces. They would laugh, they would be amused by it, creating positive emotional energy. And that's a really important thing to be able to develop and build further. So this is a good example of thinking about emotions when you design technology appropriately. So there are some of my examples. So I said we've done it in our own research projects, but also here are some brands and other things that you thought about where you've had a variety of helping people think about engaging emotionally with the people that use the service or the technology. So let me go back to, so I'm just having a look at the chat. Yeah. So again, so happy someone's enjoying the cute robot. If you get a chance to play with them, please do. And thank you for the comment. It's kind of fun to see. So if I go back, sorry. Oh, I could do it again. So the technique which I'm doing, I'm trying to get people to make it easier to think about emotions. So I mentioned very early on the project which I had, which was getting grandparents and grandchildren to have fun together over the internet. So here's an example of the notation and models that I construct. I call this a motivational model. And they've got the symbols that I had on the improvement slide. The overall goal is to encourage remote family engagement, where you've got grandparents, grandchildren, and parents. And by the way, parents are really important. While it's good that grandparents and grandchildren interact, you certainly need the moderation of parents, and they're important stakeholders to be considered. And when we asked them, and we did some studies, how do they want to look at? Well, maybe they want to read together over the internet. Maybe they want to play, maybe do a puzzle together. They just want to communicate, create memories, so you're able to talk about, or remember that cool thing that we did, and often reminisce. It's important often for grandparents to tell their grandchildren about family stories, or have the grandchildren tell their grandparents about what they did. And part of those is sharing pictures. And so there's a view of the functionality, clearly at a very high level. What do we want? What qualities do we want? So if the grandparents and grandchildren are going to use it, it needs to be easy to use. It needs to be efficient, lightweight, low maintenance, and robust. So again, often older people are scared they'll hurt the technology or they'll do something. So you want to make sure that they don't get it into a bad state. And what are the feelings that you're trying to look at? That grandparents wanted to feel they're part of their grandchildren's lives, so it's ever present. That the interactions show the affection that people have for each other. That you want it to be friendly, to be fun, as I said, that was a key part of it, and building confidence in the using technology appropriately. And it's useful, and this model that we developed was really helpful for over the life of the project. We end up building 3 different prototype applications, which were very useful. So one of them was reading, where parents and children read together. And the interesting part about the reading was we allowed children to be disruptive. So children could control as well. They could scribble on the screen or have a game with the grandparents to move pages forward and back. And people realized that was important. You shouldn't just have a very controlled reading experience. We had another one where people shared photos, and you could talk about the photos. We had another example which had both a maze and a collection of stories where people could send a message and you'd get up the next morning to read it. And you get a set of excitement. Was there a message or not? And that was important as well. It wasn't just show you the message immediately, building up the anticipation, building up the excitement and fun. So we had several projects use the same diagram that it's useful for people to develop. And these diagrams are really helpful. And that's what we're using them for in a range of different applications. So how can you make it easier in your IT experiences for people to think about creatively about creating applications that people are using? And while I've talked about apps for health and well-being, there's a whole lot of other activities that we're using these motivational models for. So this morning, for a company that I consult for, I ran a strategic planning session for them where they use these models to really help them get a clear view that they can communicate about what strategy they're using. So having good models that have come out from the research were helpful. When we teach requirements engineering, these models are very helpful to validate of people developing how they work appropriately. So that's another example of an application. Another example, to co-design services. So we run workshops. One of my daughters works for Volunteering Victoria, and we ran a session for volunteer managers to help show them a way where they can develop a common sense of purpose among their volunteers, and these models actually help. And a recent paper that we've just written, we developed an app for games for people to play with dementia, and we're able to use the models to help analyze what people found useful about their particular models. So these models, and just give you a pointer to the research, they've really got wide applicability, and it's interesting and creative how you can develop activities. And again, going back to, a lot of you are information technology students. As I said earlier, it's an exciting time to be part of information technology. There are lots of novel ways to work. It interacts over a number of fields. I think there are also some marketing students being able to analyze data appropriately for marketing purposes is really important. Creating positive vibes over social media is important. Even the announcements that EIA did of this talk, creating positive and social media, all of that is important to take into consideration. So all of these applications, it doesn't happen by its own. So let me give a slide to at least acknowledge some of my collaborators over a period of time. So in a way, those motivational models came out of some research I did with an Estonian colleague, Kuldar Tavata. So that's Kuldar and myself sitting at my kitchen table. So there you get a chance to see my house. It's a slightly younger me. My hair wasn't so gray at that time, but that's an activity. And we wrote a book, The Art of Agent-Oriented Modeling, which would have been extended for that activity. Here is a collection of people at the Living Lab at Swinburne. My close colleague, Sonia Padel, that's worked a lot and helped do some of the analysis. I think we've worked on multiple research projects together. Here are a couple of colleagues for the University of Melbourne that helped design the technology, Tim Miller and Antoinette Mendoza. And in the center here is James Marshall, who's a senior lecturer of design that helped draw it and helped with the words. So even the way that I describe the models, I use too much technical speak, and design has got me to talk about language, which is much more amenable for people to understand. So thank you. So again, I thank all of those and acknowledge their role in helping develop the message about motivational modeling. And I've come to a time where I'm happy to stop and take any questions, request any feedback. And thank you for your attention. And I hope that it was all understandable. So I'll stop there and yeah. And I might stop sharing and see if you've got any questions or comments.
Thank you, Professor Leon, for the talk. Do you have any questions to Professor Leon? Everyone? You are welcome to give any questions that you have.
And yeah, I'm happy to do it in the chat, or we've got a couple of hands up. I don't know if there's still hands up from before or.
Hello, Leon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
In technology development, from what aspects can emotion be expressed in color or layout or anything else?
So that's all of those. So in some ways, so when this kind of talk, I sometimes get the feedback of, how is the computer thinking about emotions? All I'm saying is take them into consideration. And you're absolutely right. Layout makes a difference. Color makes a difference. So in the example that I gave about the sleep application, the color, having it a black muted color, really did make a difference. Again, I mentioned 2 designs for the application to help people do a pre-screening about whether they should, what help they needed for their depression. Again, having a color, I mentioned that people thought it was authoritative. Having a dark, serious blue worked better than you would have for a bright yellow and pink. So if you had very bright colors, it wouldn't have been taken as seriously. So yes, that you are creating a particular tone. Layout does make a difference. So they're useful. And I think sharing the dialogue, thinking what activities are going to create that sense of fun. So if I'll mention again, for grandparents and grandchildren having fun, the notion that you let the grandchild scribble on the book digitally as they went along is something that would not have been built in that app unless we said, we explicitly, how are we going to create a sense of fun? How is it going to be engaging for the grandchildren? Grandchildren get bored easily. They don't want to sit. Now, maybe there are some children who are very compliant and obedient, will just sit and listen to their grandparents. Others are a little naughty or want to do something. So having that facility to let them do something and it be viewed as part of the fun was part of the design. So yes, you can incorporate emotions in those range of ways by the colors you use and the layout and what particular activities you choose to incorporate in your software.
Right, thank you, Leon. Is there any further questions that you would like to raise? Everyone?
Hi, Leon.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. It's very clear and effective. Yeah, as you mentioned in your slides, there have some technology development methods. One is waterfall model, and the other is agile method. Yeah. So the agile method is mostly used in current and is more effective. Is right?
Yes.
So it's considered more the emotional part of the users, right? Can you explain more about this part? I'm very interested about this method.
So the difference with agile and waterfall is more probably twofold. One, there's much more customer involvement with agile. In waterfall, you said, I'll get all of my requirements at the beginning, and then the developers will go away and just build the system. And that's sometimes a problem because when they built the system, it doesn't match everything and it's expensive to fix them. So with agile, it's much more incremental. So you build a piece at a time, you incorporate the end users or the clients or the customers much earlier, and you're able to get feedback. Is that what the client wants over a shorter period of time? So you're building as you go. Now, as well, you could have emotional requirements in the waterfall example, but you don't get any feedback about whether you're meeting those emotional needs because you're only testing with the end users at the very end. With agile, you can actually say you've got this emotional requirement and saying, is this software meeting my requirement of people feeling supported? And let me give you an example of that. One of the projects at the University of Melbourne for software engineering students last year, I wanted a resource to help software students learn about current technologies, such as tech stacks for React or deployment activities. And I wanted to have a page where students could go and find out about the technologies they needed in order to be successful. And I said, I wanted for people who are not very confident to feel when they arrive at the page that it's going to help them. It's kind of friendly. They feel welcomed and they're going to be helped by looking at those articles. And when the students showed me the first prototype, I said, you haven't understood that requirement. They just had a search function like they had an internet chat channel that you would type in a term and that would give you all of the articles that you talked about. So they'd missed that emotional requirement. So I was able to say early on, you haven't understood that kind of customer journey, which sometimes people said, that as soon as you log on, you feel that it's helpful, I feel comfortable, that I'm not overwhelmed. To me, that often happens when you have to search something on the internet, you get overwhelmed. So this is not an overwhelming place where you're able to get help and support. And I could give other examples, but you get earlier feedback. And because that's built in the agile cycle to get early customer feedback, it works well for emotional requirements where it would be much harder to do that in a waterfall development.
Yeah, thank you. It's very clear. Yeah, with better to involve the user's feedback as early as we can. Yeah, just can involve more character emotional parts in the design. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
So is there any more questions? No? All right. Thank you, Professor Leon, for delivering this very useful session. And we believe this workshop will benefit and broaden our audience knowledge. And I also would like to take this chance to briefly introduce that we are going to have Bachelor of Information Technology IT course at EIA in early of next year, 2022 as well. And last but not least, we have a schedule with more distinguished upcoming workshop by professor in the following week to cover more topic. And please follow our EIA social media platform and secure your time for all the next coming workshop. So this workshop has been recorded and will be uploaded on our EIA website. And you are always welcome to review the video again on our website. And thank you everyone again for joining the workshop today. And I hope you all enjoyed the section today. And we are looking forward to seeing you again soon. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and bye.